When Anna Rose O'Malley stumbled into that Comanche war camp with nothing but blood-stained clothes and tears streaming down her face, begging a legendary warrior for protection from the very people who were supposed to be her own kind, she had no idea she was about to change the course of two people's destinies forever. The sun hung like a bleeding wound over the Texas plains as Anna Rose O'Malley forced one trembling foot in front of the other, her torn calico dress catching on. Sagebrush and thorns. 3 days she had been walking through this unforgiving wilderness. 3 days since she had fled the smoking ruins of what used to be her life. 3 days since she had discovered that sometimes the greatest monsters wear familiar faces and speak with trusted voices. Her lips were cracked and swollen from thirst, her auburn hair matted with dust and dried blood that wasn't entirely her own. The leather satchel she clutched against her chest contained everything she had left in this world, which amounted to precious little beyond a few faded photographs, her mother's worn Bible, and a letter that would condemn her to death if the wrong people ever read it. In the distance, smoke rose in thin wisps from what appeared to be a camp nestled between two low hills, dotted with mesquite and cottonwood trees. Anna Rose knew she should be terrified at the sight, knew that everything she had been taught since childhood told her to run in the opposite direction as fast as her weakened legs could carry her. But terror had become such a constant companion these past weeks that it barely registered anymore, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made even fear seem like a luxury she could no longer afford. She had heard the stories, of course, whispered in hushed tones around dinner tables and shared in grave voices between the men who gathered outside the general store in Cedar Ridge. Stories of Comanche war parties that could appear like ghosts from the prairie grass. Stories of raids that left homesteads burning and families scattered to the four winds. Stories of a warrior chief named Nahuel, whose very name could make grown men reach for their weapons and women pull their children closer. But as Anna Rose stumbled closer to that smoke, she realized with a clarity that cut through her delirium like a knife through silk that she feared the people behind her far more than whatever lay ahead. The men who were hunting her wore badges and quoted scripture and called themselves lawmen, but they had murder in their hearts and lies on their tongues, and they would not stop until they had silenced her forever. At least with the Comanche, she would know where she stood. At least with them. If she died, it would be honest death rather than the kind of twisted justice that masqueraded as righteousness. Her foot caught on a prairie dog hole, and she went down hard, skinning her palms on the rocky ground and feeling something sharp tear through the thin fabric of her skirt. For a moment she simply lay there, face pressed against the sun-baked earth, breathing in the scent of sage and dust and her own fear sweat, wondering if this was how her story would end. Not with the dramatic confrontation she had been dreading, not with the vindication she had been hoping for, but simply with her body surrendering to exhaustion in the middle of nowhere, becoming just another set of bleached bones for some future traveler to puzzle over. But then she heard the sound of hoofbeats, rhythmic and deliberate, growing steadily closer. Anna Rose pushed herself up on her elbows and turned toward the sound, squinting against the late afternoon sun that turned everything into shimmering mirages and dancing shadows. 3 riders approached at an easy lope, their horses moving with the fluid grace that spoke of perfect understanding between mount and rider. The man in the center sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, his long black hair flowing loose over shoulders that were broad enough to carry the weight of the world. Even at a distance, Anna Rose could see the confidence in his posture, the easy way he held the reins, the alertness in his bearing that suggested a man who missed nothing and feared even less. This had to be him, she realized with a mixture of terror and strange relief. This had to be Nahuel. The 3 riders slowed as they approached, forming a loose semicircle around where Anna Rose knelt in the dust. Up close, she could see that Nahuel was younger than she had expected, perhaps no more than 30 years, with high cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance in a single sweeping glance. He wore buckskin leggings and a blue cloth shirt that had seen better days, but there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of absolute authority, the kind of natural leadership that made other men step back and wait for his word. The warrior to his left was older, with grey streaking his braided hair and scars crisscrossing his arms like a roadmap of old battles. The one on the right looked barely out of his teens, but sat his horse with the same easy confidence as his companions, his hand resting casually on the handle of a tomahawk that had seen recent use. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Anna Rose could hear nothing but the whisper of wind through grass and the steady breathing of the horses, could feel nothing but the weight of 3 pairs of eyes studying her with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for potentially dangerous animals. She tried to summon the words she had been rehearsing during her long walk, tried to remember the carefully crafted plea she had constructed in her mind, but all that came out was a broken whisper that barely carried across the space between. "And then, please," she managed, her voice cracking like old leather. "I have nowhere else to go." Nahuel leaned forward slightly in his saddle, those dark eyes never leaving her face. When he spoke, his English was precise and unaccented, the words of a man who had learned the language not from books, but from necessity, from years of negotiations and confrontations and careful diplomacy that kept his people alive in an increasingly hostile world. "You are far from any settlement, white woman," he said, and there was no threat in his voice, but no warmth either, just a careful neutrality that gave away nothing of his thoughts. "These plains are not safe for one traveling alone." Anna Rose forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly as exhaustion made the world tilt around her. She clutched her satchel tighter against her chest and lifted her chin with what little dignity she had left, meeting his gaze directly despite every instinct that told her to look away. "I know who you are," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "You're Nahuel, the war chief. The soldiers in Cedar Ridge fear more than death itself." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "And what does a white woman know of what soldiers fear?" Anna Rose took a shaky step forward, close enough now that she could see the thin scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, close enough to notice the beadwork on his shirt and the silver armbands that caught the dying light, close enough to see that his eyes, which she had expected to be cold or cruel, held instead a kind of weary intelligence that spoke of too many hard choices and too many sleepless nights. "I know because they're hunting me," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush before her courage could fail her. "I know because I've seen what they do to people who threaten their secrets, and I know that if they catch me, they'll make sure I disappear in a way that leaves no questions and no witnesses." The older warrior said something in rapid Comanche, his tone urgent and warning. Nahuel raised one hand slightly, never taking his eyes off Anna Rose, and the man fell silent. The younger warrior shifted in his saddle, his grip tightening on his weapon, but he too waited for his chief's signal. What secrets could a lone woman possess that would make soldiers hunt her across the plains? Nahuel asked, and now there was genuine curiosity in his voice, the kind of sharp interest that suggested a mind always gathering information, always calculating angles and possibilities. Anna Rose's hand moved instinctively to the satchel, pressed against her ribs, feeling the crinkle of paper through the worn leather. The letter that had started all of this, the document that proved beyond any doubt what she had witnessed, what she knew, what she could never unknow. The evidence that could destroy reputations and end careers and maybe, just maybe, prevent other innocent people from dying the way her husband had died. "I have proof," she said quietly, the words carrying across the still air like stones dropped into deep water. "Proof that the massacre at Broken Creek wasn't carried out by Comanche raiders. Proof that Colonel Matthews and his men slaughtered those families themselves and blamed it on your people to cover up their theft of government supplies." The silence that followed was so complete that Anna Rose could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The three warriors sat motionless as statues, but she could feel the sudden tension radiating from them like heat from a forge. The older man's hand had moved to his rifle, though he hadn't drawn it, and the younger one was no longer looking. Bored but alert in the way of a predator scenting prey, Nahuel's expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening that made him seem suddenly larger and more formidable. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, harder and more focused, like steel being drawn from its sheath. "This is a serious accusation you make," he said. "Many of my people died in the retaliation that followed Broken Creek. Many children lost their fathers. Many wives lost their husbands, because the white soldiers said we were responsible for that slaughter." Anna Rose nodded, feeling tears start to burn behind her eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so terribly sorry, but I can prove it wasn't you. I have a letter from my husband written the night before he died. He was there, he saw what really happened, and he couldn't live with the lie." She pulled the satchel closer against her chest, as if the physical pressure could somehow contain the pain that came with remembering. James was a good man, an honest man, but he was also a soldier who followed orders. When he couldn't stay silent anymore, when he tried to tell the truth about what Colonel Matthews had done, they said he was having nightmares, that the stress of frontier life had driven him mad. 2 days later, they found him dead in his quarters, supposedly from his own hand. The older warrior spoke again in Comanche, his tone urgent and questioning. Nahuel answered without taking his eyes off Anna Rose, his response brief and decisive. Whatever he said seemed to satisfy his companions, though they remained alert and ready. "You would risk your life to bring this proof to your enemies." "Enemies," Nahuel observed, and there was something almost like respect in his voice now. "Why? What do you gain from such a dangerous truth?" Anna Rose let out a shaky breath, feeling some of the terrible tension that had been coiled in her. Chest for weeks finally began to loosen. "Justice for my husband, justice for your people, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, justice for those families at Broken Creek who died for nothing more than being in the wrong place when evil men needed scapegoats." She took another step forward, close enough now that she would have to crane her neck to look up at him if he were standing. "I know I have no right to ask this of you. I know my people have brought nothing but death and betrayal to yours. But I have nowhere else to go, and no one else who would believe me even if I could reach them alive." The wind picked up slightly, stirring the dust around the horses' hooves and carrying the scent of the camp where cooking fires were being lit against the approaching darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its voice rising and falling in a melody that seemed to speak of loneliness and longing and the kind of wildness that could never be tamed. Nahuel studied her for what felt like an eternity, those dark eyes seeming to look straight through her skin to whatever lay beneath. Anna Rose forced herself to remain still under that scrutiny, forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching, though every instinct screamed at her to run or hide or somehow make herself smaller and less noticeable. Finally he spoke, and his words cut through the evening air with the finality of a blade through silk. "Then stay under my protection." The relief that flooded through Anna Rose was so intense it nearly knocked her to her knees. She pressed one hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that threatened to escape, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, even as her whole body began to shake with the release of fear she had been carrying for so long. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words seemed pitifully inadequate for the magnitude of what he was offering. "Thank you so much." Nahuel swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, landing lightly on his feet and moving toward her with the kind of controlled grace that spoke of a lifetime spent in perfect harmony with his own body. Up close, he was taller than she had realized, broad-shouldered and lean-muscled in the way of men who lived their lives in constant motion. "You are injured," he observed, nodding toward the dark stains on her dress and the cuts on her hands. "And you have traveled far without food or water." Anna Rose nodded, suddenly aware of just how badly her body was crying out for basic care. 3 days since I left Cedar Ridge. I didn't dare stop anywhere, didn't dare approach any settlements. They have men watching all the usual places. Then we will see that you are fed and tended to," Nahuel said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if offering sanctuary to fleeing white women was something he did every day. He turned to the older warrior and spoke a few words in Comanche. The man nodded and wheeled his horse around, heading back toward the camp at a steady lope. "Ayana will prepare a place for you," Nahuel explained, turning back to Anna Rose. "She is my sister, and she leads the women of our band. You will be safe with her while we decide what must be done with this proof you carry." Anna Rose felt another wave of relief wash over her. She had not dared to hope that there would be women in the camp, had not allowed herself to imagine anything beyond basic survival. The prospect of female companionship, even if it came with the complications of cultural differences and language barriers, seemed like an unexpected gift. "I don't speak Comanche," she said suddenly, the practical concerns beginning to surface. As the immediate fear receded, "I don't know your customs, your ways. I don't want to give offense or cause trouble." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Nahuel's mouth. "You have already caused trouble simply by existing, Anna Rose O'Malley. A little more will not matter." She stared at him in surprise. "How do you know my name? I never told you." Now he did smile, a quick flash of white teeth that transformed his entire face and made him look suddenly younger and far less intimidating. "The same way I know that your husband was Sergeant James O'Malley of the 3rd Cavalry, and that you have been married for 2 years, and that you taught school in San Antonio before following him to Cedar Ridge. Information travels far and fast on the plains, especially when it concerns those who might be friend or enemy." Anna Rose felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. If Nahuel knew so much about her, then others might know as well. Colonel Matthews and his men might already be closer than she had dared to imagine. Nahuel must have seen the fear in her expression, because his tone became gentler, more reassuring. "Do not worry. My sources are not your enemy's sources, and even if they were, you are under my protection now. No harm will come to you while you remain with my people." The younger warrior returned then, leading a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. Nahuel took the reins and gestured toward the horse. "Can you ride?" "It is not far to camp, but you are clearly exhausted." Anna Rose nodded, though the truth was that she had ridden very little in her life and never bareback in the Comanche style. But she was far too tired to walk another step, and the horse seemed calm enough that she might manage to stay on its back for the short journey. Nahuel helped her mount, his hands steady and impersonal as he guided her leg over the horse's back and showed her how to grip with her knees rather than relying on a saddle. The warmth of the animal beneath her was comforting, and she found herself relaxing slightly for the first time in days. As they rode toward the camp, the younger warrior flanking them while Nahuel led her horse. Anna Rose found herself studying her unlikely protector from the corner of her eye. Everything she had been told about Comanche war chiefs suggested they should be savage, brutal men who lived only for violence and warfare. But Nahuel moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, spoke with the measured consideration of a natural diplomat, and had shown her more genuine kindness in the space of an hour than she had received from her own people in weeks. The camp, when they reached it, was larger than she had expected and far more organized. Lodge poles stretched skyward in neat rows, cook fires burned in carefully tended circles, and horses grazed peacefully in makeshift corrals. Children ran between the lodges, their laughter carrying on the evening air, while women tended to various tasks and men sat in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. As they entered the camp proper, conversation died and heads turned toward them, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Anna Rose felt herself shrinking under those stares, acutely aware of how she must look with her torn dress and wild hair and the obvious marks of desperate flight. Nahuel seemed to sense her discomfort because he spoke loudly in Comanche, his voice carrying easily across the camp. Whatever he said caused a visible relaxation in the watching faces, though many continued to stare with frank curiosity at the white woman who had appeared so unexpectedly among them. They stopped before a lodge that was larger than the others and decorated with painted symbols that Anna Rose could not begin to interpret. A woman emerged from the entrance, tall and elegant, with graying hair, braided with silver ornaments, and intelligent eyes that immediately fixed on Anna Rose with shrewd assessment. "This is Ayana," Nahuel said, dismounting and coming to help. Anna rose down from her horse. "She will care for you." Ayana approached with the fluid grace that seemed to run in their family, speaking to her brother in rapid Comanche while studying Anna Rose with the kind of thorough attention usually reserved for interesting puzzles. Whatever she said made Nahuel chuckle and respond in the same language, their conversation clearly about Anna Rose, though she could understand none of it. Finally, Ayana turned to her directly and spoke in heavily accented but perfectly understandable English. "You are welcome in my lodge, white woman. Come, you need food and rest and clean clothes." Anna Rose felt tears prick her eyes at this simple offer of basic human care. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay such kindness." Ayana's stern expression softened slightly. "Kindness needs no repayment, but truth is a different matter. If you have brought truth to us, then perhaps we are the ones who owe you debt." As Anna Rose followed Ayana toward the lodge, she glanced back over her shoulder to see Nahuel watching their retreat with an expression she could not quite read. There was concern there, and calculation, and something else that might have been the beginning of respect. Whatever happened next, she realized, her life had just taken a turn that would change everything. She thought she knew about right and wrong, about enemy and friend, about the complex truths that lay buried beneath the simple stories people told themselves about the world. Inside Ayana's lodge, the world became a cocoon of warm shadows and flickering firelight that danced across painted buffalo hide walls. Anna Rose had expected something primitive, perhaps squalid, based on the stories she had heard in Cedar Ridge about savage living conditions. Instead, she found herself in a space that spoke of careful craftsmanship and deep cultural pride. Intricate beadwork adorned storage pouches hanging from lodge poles. Woven mats covered the ground in geometric patterns that seemed to tell stories she could not read, and the air carried the pleasant scents of sage and sweetgrass rather than the unwashed odors her prejudices had led her to expect. Ayana moved through this space with the quiet efficiency of someone completely at home in her environment, gathering items from various containers while speaking in a low, melodic voice. that Anna Rose gradually realized was meant to be soothing. The older woman's English might be heavily accented, but her intent was clearly to put the unexpected guest at ease. "First, we clean wounds," Ayana said, settling beside Anna Rose with a bowl of warm water and strips of soft cloth that looked to have been cut from worn but clean buckskin. "Then food, then sleep. Tomorrow we talk of heavier things." Anna Rose submitted to this care with a gratitude so profound it made her chest ache. When had anyone last tended to her with such gentle competence? Certainly not during the terrible weeks following James's death, when the other army wives had whispered behind their hands about the young widow who asked too many questions and wouldn't accept the official story. Not during her desperate flight across half of Texas, when every settlement she approached might have contained enemies wearing friendly faces. As Ayana cleaned the cuts on her palms and the deeper gash along her forearm, where a thorny bush had torn through fabric and flesh, Anna Rose found herself studying the woman's face in the firelight. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter as well as sorrow, and a steadiness in her movements that suggested someone who had weathered many storms without losing her essential kindness. "You have children?" Anna Rose asked, partly to distract herself from the sting of whatever herb-infused solution Ayana was using to cleanse her wounds, partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about this woman who was showing her such unexpected hospitality. Ayana's hands paused for just a moment in their careful work. "I had 3 sons," she said quietly. 2 were killed in raids against the Blue Soldiers 5 winters ago. The 3rd took a white woman as wife and lives now in the reservation lands far to the north. The matter-of-fact way she delivered this information made it somehow more heartbreaking than if she had wept or raged. Anna Rose felt ashamed of her curiosity, ashamed of the easy assumptions she had made about the lives of people she had never bothered to see as fully human. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so very sorry for your losses." Ayana resumed her ministrations, wrapping Anna Rose's arm with practiced skill. "Sorrow shared is sorrow halved, as you white people say, but also joy shared is joy doubled. Tonight you are safe, fed, warm. This is joy worth sharing, yes." Before Anna Rose could respond, voices rose outside the lodge, men speaking in rapid Comanche, with tones that suggested heated debate. She tensed instinctively, her hand moving toward the satchel that still rested against her hip, but Ayana made a dismissive gesture. "They argue about what to do with you," she explained matter-of-factly. "Some say you are trap, sent by soldiers, to learn our location. Some say you are gift from spirits, bringing chance for justice. Niguel listens to all voices before deciding." Anna Rose felt her stomach clench with renewed fear. In the warmth and safety of the lodge, she had almost forgotten that her situation remained precarious, that she was entirely dependent on the goodwill of people who had every reason to distrust her. "What do you think?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness in posing such a direct question. Ayana sat back on her heels, studying Anna Rose's face with those shrewd dark eyes. "I think you carry great pain, like wounded animal that bites even those trying to help, but also great courage to come so far alone with such dangerous truth. And I think my brother sees both these things and chooses protection over suspicion." The voices outside grew louder, more insistent. Anna Rose caught the name Matthews, spoken with venom, heard her own name repeated several times in tones, ranging from curious to hostile. She wished desperately that she could understand what was being said, could defend herself or explain her position, or at least know whether she should be preparing to run again. "Tell me about your proof," Ayana said suddenly, her voice cutting through Anna Rose's anxious thoughts. "This letter that brings soldiers hunting you like wolves." Anna Rose's hand moved protectively to the satchel. Even here, even surrounded by the illusion of safety, she hesitated to reveal the full extent of what she carried. But looking into Ayana's weathered face, seeing the genuine concern there, she made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "My husband was part of the patrol that found the bodies at Broken Creek," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. 23 people dead, including women and children, scalped and mutilated in ways meant to look like Comanche work. Ayana's expression hardened, but she said nothing, waiting for Anna Rose to continue. "James came home that night different than I had ever seen him, shaking, pale, unable to eat or sleep. I thought it was just the horror of what he had witnessed, the kind of shock any decent man would feel after seeing such carnage. But then Colonel Matthews called all the men together and told them exactly what they were to report, exactly how. They were to describe what they had found." She pulled the satchel closer, feeling the crinkle of paper inside. James realized that night that the wounds weren't right, that the scalping had been done by someone who didn't know the proper techniques, that there were boot prints around the bodies where there should have been moccasin tracks. He began asking questions, quietly at first, then more insistently when his concerns were dismissed. The argument outside seemed to be reaching some kind of conclusion. Anna Rose could hear Nahuel's voice, calm and authoritative, speaking in longer sentences than the rapid exchanges that had preceded it. Whatever he was saying seemed to be settling the debate, at least for now. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "The night before he died, James wrote everything down," Anna Rose continued, driven by some desperate need to finally share the burden she had been carrying alone. Every detail that proved the massacre was not Comanche work, every inconsistency in the official story, every conversation he had overheard about moving stolen government supplies through remote trading posts. "He hid the letter in our cabins, root cellar, and made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure the truth came to light." Ayana leaned forward, her dark eyes intense with interest. "And you believe Colonel Matthews killed your husband to keep this secret?" "I know he did," Anna Rose said firmly. "James was found dead in his quarters, with his own service pistol in his hand, supposedly driven to suicide by the horrors he had witnessed. But James was left-handed, and the gun was in his right hand. James was terrified of deep water, but they said he had been planning to request transfer to a river patrol. James had never touched alcohol in his life, but they claimed he had been drinking heavily in the days before his death." She felt tears beginning to burn behind her eyes, but forced herself to continue. "I knew it was murder, but I had no proof beyond a widow's suspicions. Then I found the letter, and I understood why they had killed him. The evidence he had gathered could destroy not just Colonel Matthews, but half the territorial command structure. There are fortunes being made from those stolen supplies, and the Comanche have been taking the blame for crimes committed by the very men sworn to protect innocent settlers." The lodge flap stirred, and Nahuel entered without ceremony, his tall frame seeming to fill the space despite the generous proportions of his sister's home. Anna Rose felt herself tense involuntarily, reading in his expression that the debate outside had not gone entirely in her favor. "The council is divided," he said without preamble, settling cross-legged on the opposite side of the fire from where Anna Rose sat. "Some of my war chiefs believe you should be returned to the soldiers with a message that we do not harbor fugitives. Others think you should be kept as hostage against future raids." Anna Rose's blood seemed to freeze in her veins. "And what do you think?" Nahuel studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable in the flickering firelight. "I think truth is more valuable than either diplomacy or revenge, but truth must be proven before it can be acted upon." He gestured toward the satchel. She still clutched against her side. "Show me this letter. Let me see for myself what proof you carry of these grave accusations." Anna Rose hesitated, her mind racing through all the ways this could go wrong. Once she revealed the letter, she would have no more bargaining chips, no way to ensure her continued safety if Nahuel decided she was more trouble than she was worth. But she had come this far on faith and desperation, and turning back now would mean certain death at the hands of Colonel Matthews and his men. With hands that trembled only slightly, she opened the satchel and withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges and creased from careful handling. The ink had faded somewhat, but James's careful script was still clearly legible in the firelight. Nahuel took the letter with surprising gentleness, unfolding it with the care one might show a butterfly's wing. As he read, Anna Rose watched his expression shift from skeptical interest to grim concentration to something that might have been righteous anger. "This mentions specific dates, specific amounts of supplies," he said finally, looking up from the letter with eyes that seemed to burn with their own inner fire. "Your husband names names, describes conversations, provides details that could only come from someone who was present during these crimes." "James was a good soldier," Anna Rose said quietly. "He believed in duty and honor and protecting innocent people. When he realized that his commanding officers were not only failing in that duty, but actively participating in the murder of innocents, it broke something fundamental inside him." Nahuel refolded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. This information could indeed destroy Colonel Matthews and his conspirators, but it could also get you killed in a dozen different ways, and anyone who helps you along with it. "I know," Anna Rose whispered. "I know I'm asking you to risk everything for a stranger, for someone whose people have brought nothing but suffering to yours. But Nahuel, if we don't stop this, how many more innocent families will die? How many more massacres will be blamed on your people while the real killers profit from their crimes?" The war chief was quiet for so long that Anna Rose began to fear she had overplayed her hand, pushed too hard when she should have remained grateful for simple sanctuary. But when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that seemed to settle over the lodge like morning mist. 3 days ago, my scouts reported unusual activity around Fort Davidson, supply wagons moving at night, meetings between officers and civilian traders, guards posted at locations that should hold nothing more valuable than standard provisions. Anna Rose felt her heart begin to race. That fits with what James discovered. He wrote that Colonel Matthews had been using Fort Davidson as a staging point for redistributing stolen supplies to private buyers. If your husband's information is accurate, then we have an opportunity for more than just justice, Nahuel continued, his strategic mind clearly working through the implications. We have a chance to strike a blow against the corruption that feeds the hatred between our peoples. Ayana, who had been listening to this exchange in thoughtful silence, finally spoke up. "Brother, you speak of opportunity, but what of danger? The soldiers will not simply allow their crimes to be exposed. They will fight like cornered wolves to protect themselves." "They are already fighting like cornered wolves," Nahuel replied grimly. "They hunt this woman across the plains. They blame our people for their crimes. They use fear and hatred to justify their theft and murder. At least now we have the chance to fight back with truth instead of just with weapons." Anna Rose felt a surge of hope so powerful it left her dizzy. "You'll help me? You'll help me get this evidence to someone who can act on it?" "I will do more than that," Nahuel said, and there was something in his voice that made both women look at him sharply. "I will help you gather additional evidence, proof so overwhelming that even the corrupt territorial government cannot ignore it. And then, Anna Rose O'Malley, we will make sure that justice is served not just for your husband, but for all the innocents who have died because of these men's greed." The fire crackled and sparked between them, casting dancing shadows on the painted walls, while outside the camp settled into the quiet rhythms of evening. Anna Rose felt something inside her chest that had been tight and cold for weeks finally begin to warm and loosen. For the first time since James's death, she was not alone in her quest for justice. For the first time since fleeing Cedar Ridge, she had allies who understood the stakes and were willing to share the risks. "There is something else," Nahuel added, his tone becoming more formal, more ceremonial. "If you are to remain under my protection, if you are to be part of this effort to expose these crimes, then you must understand what that means. You will be bound by our laws, subject to our customs, part of our community in all ways that matter." Anna Rose felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. What does that mean exactly? "It means you are no longer a white woman seeking temporary shelter," Ayana explained gently. "It means you become sister, daughter, member of our band with all the rights and responsibilities that brings. It means you belong somewhere again." The enormity of what they were offering hit Anna Rose like a physical blow. Belonging, community, family chosen rather than inherited, bonds forged through shared purpose rather than mere accident of birth. After weeks of being completely alone, of feeling like she was floating untethered in a hostile world, the idea of having a place where she was wanted and valued seemed almost too good to be true. "I would be honored," she whispered, tears flowing freely now down her cheeks. "I would be so very honored to belong somewhere again." Nahuel nodded with satisfaction, while Ayana moved to embrace her, strong arms wrapping around Anna Rose's shoulders with maternal warmth. As she sat there in the circle of firelight, surrounded by people who had been strangers mere hours ago, but who were now offering her something more precious than gold, Anna Rose felt the first stirrings of something she had thought died with. James. Hope for a future that held more than just survival, more than just vengeance, more than just the cold satisfaction of seeing her enemies brought low. Hope for a life that honored both her husband's memory and her own need to build something meaningful from the ashes of her old existence. "Tomorrow we begin planning," Nahuel said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Tonight you rest and heal and remember what it feels like to be safe. You will need all your strength for what lies ahead." As he moved toward the lodge entrance, Anna Rose called out impulsively, "Nahuel, why are you doing this? Really? You could have sent me away, avoided all this risk and complication. Why are you choosing to help me?" He paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression that seemed to hold depths of meaning she was only beginning to fathom. "Because sometimes the spirits send us exactly the ally we need, even when they come wearing the face of an enemy. And because, Anna Rose O'Malley, justice delayed is justice denied, no matter what color skin wears the wounds of injustice." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Anna Rose and Ayana alone with the crackling fire and the weight of promises made and accepted. Outside, the camp gradually settled into sleep, but inside the lodge, two women sat talking quietly, long into the night, sharing stories of loss and hope, of the different ways people learned to survive in a world that seemed determined to break them. And somewhere in those quiet hours before dawn, Anna Rose O'Malley began to understand that she had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for: a new family, a new purpose, and maybe, if she was very fortunate, a new chance at the kind of love that could survive any storm. Dawn broke over the Comanche camp with the soft whisper of prairie wind through buffalo grass, and Anna Rose woke to find herself dressed in clothes that transformed her very identity. During the night, while she had slept the deep sleep of true exhaustion, Ayana had worked by firelight to create garments that would allow the white woman to move freely among the people without drawing unwanted attention from distant observers. The buckskin dress was softer than anything Anna Rose had ever worn, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that Ayana explained held specific meanings about protection, wisdom, and new beginnings. Matching moccasins replaced her worn leather. Boots, their silent soles a revelation after months of heavy footfalls that announced her presence to any tracker within a mile. Most striking of all was the way Ayanna had braided Anna Rose's auburn hair with thin strips of rawhide and small silver ornaments that caught the morning light like captured stars. "Now you look like one of us," Ayanna said with satisfaction, stepping back to admire her handiwork. From distance, soldiers see only another Comanche woman. Up close, we say you are captive, taken in raid, learning our ways. Anna Rose studied her reflection in a polished metal mirror that Ayanna produced from her collection of treasured objects. The transformation was so complete that she barely recognized herself. Gone was the pale, frightened widow in torn calico who had stumbled into camp 3 days ago. In her place stood someone who looked capable of surviving in this harsh landscape, someone who belonged to this community of warriors and survivors. "It feels like putting on a new life," Anna Rose murmured, touching the beadwork with wondering fingers, "like becoming someone I was always meant to be but never had the chance to discover." Outside the lodge, the camp was already bustling with purposeful activity. Warriors tended to their weapons and horses. Women prepared food and tended children. Elders sat in the morning sunshine, sharing stories and advice. But Anna Rose could sense an undercurrent of tension, a heightened alertness that spoke of important decisions being made and dangerous plans taking shape. Nahuel appeared at the lodge entrance as if summoned by her thoughts. But the man who greeted her this morning was different from the one who had offered protection to a desperate stranger. This was Nahuel, the war chief in full authority, painted for battle with symbols that Anna Rose was beginning to understand, spoke of his rank, his achievements, and his spiritual protection. Eagle feathers decorated his long black hair, and the rifle in his hands was cleaned and oiled to perfection. "The scouts returned at first light," he said without preamble, his dark eyes serious as they studied Anna Rose's transformed appearance. "A cavalry patrol passed 5 miles south of here yesterday, asking questions about a white woman traveling alone. They are led by Lieutenant Morrison, one of Colonel Matthew's most trusted subordinates." Anna Rose felt her stomach drop. "How many men?" 20 soldiers plus 3 civilian trackers who know this country well," Nahuel replied grimly. "They are moving in a search pattern that will bring them through this area within 2 days, maybe less if they pick up our trail." Ayanna moved to stand beside her brother, her expression equally grave. "We could move the camp, brother. Find new grounds to the west, where the canyons would hide our presence." "No," Nahuel said firmly. "Running would only confirm their suspicions and put our women and children at greater risk. Better to use their hunt against them, turn their aggression into the trap that finally brings them down." Anna Rose looked between the siblings, trying to understand the strategic thinking that lay behind Nahuel's decision. "What do you mean?" A smile that held no warmth whatsoever crossed the war chief's features. "I mean, Anna Rose O'Malley, that we are going to give Lieutenant Morrison and his men exactly what they are looking for. We are going to let them find evidence of your presence here, let them believe they have cornered their quarry. And then we are going to show them what happens when corrupt soldiers venture too far from their fortress of lies." The plan that Nahuel outlined over the next hour was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to hide Anna Rose's presence, they would use it as bait to draw the patrol into a carefully prepared ambush. The cavalry would find signs of a white woman in the camp, evidence suggesting she was being held captive, and their rescue instincts combined with their orders would drive them to attack. But instead of facing a surprised and unprepared enemy, they would find themselves trapped in a canyon with no escape route and no way to call for reinforcements. "The goal is not to kill them," Nahuel explained carefully, his words directed as much to the gathered war chiefs as to Anna Rose herself. Dead soldiers would bring the full might of the army down upon us. Instead, we capture them alive, take their weapons and horses, and then we make them an offer they cannot refuse. One of the older warriors, a grizzled man with scars crisscrossing his arms like a road map of old battles, spoke up in rapid Comanche. Anna Rose caught enough words to understand that he was questioning the wisdom of taking prisoners rather than simply eliminating the threat. Nahuel's response was patient but firm, his authority evident in the way the other men deferred to his judgment even when they clearly had reservations. When he switched back to English, it was to ensure that Anna Rose understood her role in the coming confrontation. "You will be the key to everything," he told her seriously. "When the soldiers see you apparently held captive, their first instinct will be to negotiate for your release. That moment of hesitation, that assumption that they hold the moral high ground, will be when we strike." Anna Rose felt a flutter of fear in her stomach, but also something that might have been anticipation. For weeks she had been running, hiding, reacting to the moves of more powerful enemies. Now, for the first time since James's death, she would be part of a plan that put her on the offensive. "What happens after we capture them?" she asked. "How does taking prisoners help us expose Colonel Matthew's crimes?" Nahuel's smile returned, and this time it held genuine warmth along with fierce determination. "Because, my brave Anna Rose, we are not just going to capture Lieutenant Morrison and his men. We are going to make them witnesses to their own corruption, force them to choose between loyalty to criminal commanders and their duty as soldiers, sworn to protect innocent lives." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of intense preparation that gave Anna Rose her first real glimpse into the sophisticated military organization that lay behind Comanche's success in warfare. This was not the disorganized savagery that frontier newspapers loved to describe, but rather a carefully orchestrated system of tactics and strategy that had kept the people free and fighting for generations against overwhelming odds. Warriors spent hours checking and rechecking their weapons, not just rifles and pistols captured from previous encounters with the cavalry, but traditional bows that could kill silently, lances that could strike from horseback, and tomahawks that served equally well as tools and weapons. Anna Rose watched in fascination as they worked, noting the pride each man took in the condition of his equipment and the easy camaraderie that existed even as they prepared for mortal combat. The women of the camp were equally busy, though. Their preparations took different forms. They packed essential belongings in case the plan went wrong and a hasty retreat became necessary, prepared medical supplies for treating wounded warriors, and organized the children into groups that could be moved quickly if the battle turned against them. Anna Rose found herself assigned to help with these preparations, her new status as a member of the band making her both welcome and expected to contribute. "You are learning to think like one of us," observed Ayana as they worked together, "to roll bandages and prepare poultices from medicinal herbs. Yesterday, you were white woman seeking protection. Today, you are sister preparing for war." The transformation felt both natural and surreal, as if Anna Rose was discovering parts of herself that had been dormant her entire life. The competence she displayed in practical tasks, the way she anticipated needs and solved problems without being asked, the growing fluency with which she navigated the complex social dynamics of the camp, all of it suggested that perhaps she had been living as only half herself for years without realizing it. Nahuel spent much of the day in consultation with his war chiefs and scouts, refining the details of the ambush and ensuring that every contingency had been considered. Anna Rose caught glimpses of these meetings, noting the way he listened carefully to all voices before making decisions, the respect with which even the most senior warriors treated his judgment, and the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. As evening approached, he sought her out where she sat helping to prepare the evening meal, settling beside her with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over their few days together. In the firelight, with war paint partially faded and exhaustion evident in his posture, he looked younger and somehow more vulnerable than the formidable war chief who commanded absolute loyalty from dozens of hardened fighters. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. His words meant for her ears alone. Anna Rose considered the question seriously, examining her own emotional state with the kind of honest self-assessment that had become habitual during her weeks of solitary flight. "Yes," she said finally, "but not the way I was afraid when I was running. Then I was afraid of being caught, of failing, of dying before I could make James's sacrifice mean something. Now I'm afraid of letting you down, of being the weak link that gets good people hurt." Nahuel turned to study her profile in the flickering light, his dark eyes serious and considering. "Fear for others is the beginning of courage. Fear only for yourself is the beginning of cowardice. You have already shown which kind of fear drives you." The simple validation of her worth, coming from someone she had grown to respect so deeply, sent warmth spreading through Anna Rose's chest. "Well, can I ask you something personal?" He nodded, settling more comfortably beside her as the camp around them gradually quieted into evening routines. "Why aren't you married?" she asked, then immediately felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous. I just mean you're clearly respected, successful, and I would have expected—" His low chuckle cut off her flustered explanation. "I was married," he said simply. "Her name was Kachina, which means sacred dancer. She died in the great sickness 3 winters ago, along with our infant son." Anna Rose felt her heart clench, with sympathy and recognition. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "No, it is good to speak of them sometimes," Nahuel replied, his voice carrying a weight of old grief that had been transformed into something more bearable through time and acceptance. "Kachina would have liked you, I think. She also had the gift of seeing truth beneath surface appearances, of knowing when someone could be trusted even when logic suggested otherwise." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low and listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Anna Rose found herself studying Nahuel's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the intelligence evident in his dark eyes, the way he held himself with unconscious dignity, even in moments of relaxation. When had she begun to see him not just as her protector, but as a man she could care for in more personal ways? "Anna Rose," he said eventually, and something in his tone made her look at him more sharply. "Tomorrow we risk everything on a plan that could save many lives or cost us our own. If something happens to me, if the ambush fails and we are overwhelmed, I want you to know that these days with you have reminded me what it feels like to have purpose beyond mere survival." The intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at her as if memorizing her features, made Anna Rose's breath catch in her throat. "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said fiercely. "I won't let it." His smile at that was radiant, transforming his entire face and making him look almost boyish, despite the gravity of their situation. "Spoken like a true warrior woman," he murmured. And before Anna Rose could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her with a gentleness that spoke of hope as much as desire. The kiss was brief, but profound, carrying within it all the unspoken emotions that had been building between them since that first night when he had offered protection to a desperate stranger. When they separated, Anna Rose felt as if something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of what her future might hold. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers, "I want you to know that you saved me in ways that have nothing to do with soldiers or safety. You helped me remember who I am beneath the grief and fear Nahuel caught her hand in his, pressing it against his cheek as he closed his eyes. "And you helped me remember that some wounds can heal, given time and the right company." The night before the ambush, the camp took on an almost ceremonial atmosphere as warriors performed rituals that would prepare them spiritually for the coming conflict. Anna Rose watched from respectful distance as men painted themselves with symbols of protection and power. As elders offered prayers to spirits she was only beginning to understand, as weapons were blessed and horses were prepared with the same. Reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Ayana found her during these preparations, approaching with something wrapped in soft doeskin that she presented with formal ceremony. "For you," she said simply, "from your new family." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Inside the wrapping was a knife unlike anything Anna Rose had ever seen, its blade forged from steel that gleamed like captured moonlight, and its handle carved from some dense wood that felt warm to the touch. The leather sheath was decorated with beadwork that matched her dress, and the whole ensemble spoke of craftsmanship that elevated a simple tool into something approaching art. "I can't accept this," Anna Rose protested, recognizing the value of such a gift. "It's too precious, too beautiful. It belonged to my youngest son," Ayana said quietly. "He carried it through 3 winters of war before the great sickness took him. Now it needs new hands to honor his memory." The weight of such trust, the profound generosity of being given something so personally significant, left Anna Rose speechless for a long moment. Finally she managed, "I will carry it with honor, and I will never forget the brave warrior who carried it before me." As the night deepened, warriors began to take their positions around the canyon where the ambush would unfold. Anna Rose watched them disappear into the darkness like ghosts, their movements so silent and natural that within minutes she could detect no sign of their presence. The sophistication of their tactics, the seamless way they coordinated without apparent communication, drove home yet again how completely she had misjudged these people based on prejudice and ignorance. Nahuel was among the last to leave, pausing beside her as she stood at the edge of camp, looking out toward the canyon where their enemies would soon appear. "Remember," he said softly, "when the soldiers arrive, you must appear to be our captive, frightened, perhaps desperate, but not defiant. Let them believe they are rescuing you until the moment we spring the trap." Anna Rose nodded, though. Her throat felt tight with anxiety. "And if something goes wrong, if they don't react the way we expect, then you run," he said firmly. "North toward the river where my sister will be waiting with fast horses. Do not try to help us fight. Do not try to be heroic. Just survive and find a way to make sure your husband's letter reaches people who can act on it." She wanted to protest, to insist that she wouldn't abandon him and the others who were risking everything for her cause, but the look in his eyes told her that this was not a request, but a command from her war chief. "I understand," she whispered. He studied her face in the starlight, then leaned down to kiss her once more, this time with an intensity that spoke of promises and possibilities that might never be fulfilled. "I will come back to you," he murmured against her lips. "We will finish what we started together." And then he was gone, disappearing into the night like smoke on the wind, leaving Anna Rose alone with her fears and her hopes, and the weight of a letter that had already cost one man his life and might yet cost many more before justice was finally served. Dawn was still hours away, but already she could feel the approaching storm that would determine whether her quest for justice would end in triumph or tragedy. Tomorrow would bring Lieutenant Morrison and his patrol into the carefully prepared trap, and everything that followed would depend on the courage and skill of warriors who had accepted her as one of their own. Standing there in the darkness, wearing clothes that transformed her identity and carrying a knife that connected her to a dead hero's legacy, Anna Rose O'Malley felt the last vestiges of her old life fall away like shed skin. Whatever happened in the canyon tomorrow, she would face it not as a frightened widow seeking revenge, but as a member of the Comanche nation fighting for justice, alongside people she had come to love as family. The morning mist clung to Devil's Canyon, like the breath of sleeping spirits when Lieutenant Morrison's patrol crested the ridge overlooking the Comanche camp. Anna Rose, positioned exactly where Nahuel had instructed her to wait, felt her heart hammering against her ribs as 20 cavalry soldiers and 3 civilian scouts spread out in attack formation. From her vantage point near the canyon mouth, she could see the confidence in their movements, the assumption of easy victory that would be their undoing. Lieutenant Morrison himself was a lean man, with pale eyes, and the kind of rigid military bearing that spoke of unquestioning obedience to authority. Even at a distance, Anna Rose could see the way he studied the camp through field glasses, noting the positions of lodges, the location of horse herds, and most importantly, the figure of a white woman in Comanche dress who appeared to be under guard near the canyon's narrow entrance. The 3 civilian trackers were more cautious, their weathered faces showing the kind of wariness that came from years of surviving in hostile territory. Anna Rose recognized one of them as Jake Brennan, a man who had often drunk at her husband's table back in Cedar Ridge, sharing stories of Indian fights and narrow escapes. The irony that he was now hunting her on behalf of the very men who had murdered James was not lost on her. "There she is," she heard Morrison say to his sergeant, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. Just like the telegraph. From Colonel Matthews described, red hair, medium build, wearing native dress. The hostage situation gives us perfect justification for attack. Anna Rose forced herself to remain still, despite every instinct screaming at her to run or fight, or somehow warn the invisible warriors who surrounded the canyon. According to plan, she was supposed to appear frightened and desperate, a white woman held against her will by savage captors. The role should have been easy to play, given how genuinely terrified she felt, but there was something about Morrison's tone that sent ice through her veins. The sergeant, a grizzled man with sergeant's stripes and the kind of scars that spoke of actual combat experience, seemed less eager for immediate action. "Lieutenant, the woman appears unharmed. Standard protocol would be to attempt negotiation before resorting to force." Morrison's laugh was cold and entirely without humor. "Sergeant Mills, you seem to forget that we're not here on a rescue mission. We're here to eliminate a security threat and recover stolen military documents. If the woman happens to survive the process, well, that's a bonus." The casual way he discussed her potential death, the complete absence of any concern for her welfare, drove home with brutal clarity that Anna Rose had never been seen as a person to be saved, but rather as a problem to be solved. Colonel Matthews had sent this patrol not to rescue a distressed widow, but to silence a dangerous witness, and her supposed captivity was merely a convenient excuse for the violence they intended to inflict. Jake Brennan spat into the dust and adjusted his grip on his rifle. 20 soldiers against maybe a dozen warriors should be easy enough. But Morrison, you might want to consider taking at least one of them alive for questioning. Could be valuable intelligence about other hostile bands in the area. My orders are quite specific, Brennan," Morrison replied curtly. "No survivors means no contradictory stories later. Clean sweep, no witnesses, and we report that the woman was killed during the rescue attempt despite our best efforts." Anna Rose felt bile rise in her throat as she finally understood the full scope of Colonel Matthews' plan. Not only did he intend to have her murdered, but he was planning to massacre an entire Comanche band and blame their deaths on her supposed rescue. The cynical efficiency of it, the way her quest for justice was being twisted into justification for genocide, made her hands shake with rage. From somewhere in the rocks above the canyon, an eagle cried once, its voice echoing off stone walls. With haunting clarity, Ana Rose recognized the signal that Nahuel had described, the final warning that the trap was about to be sprung. In moments, the morning would explode into violence, and everything would depend on whether the Comanche warriors could overcome 20 well-armed soldiers before Morrison's true intentions became reality. Morrison raised his arm to signal the charge, his pale eyes fixed on Ana Rose's position with predatory intensity. Remember, men, we're dealing with hostiles who have murdered innocent civilians and taken a white woman captive. Show them the same mercy they showed the families at Broken Creek. The bitter irony of his words, invoking the very massacre that Colonel Matthews and his men had committed themselves, was the last straw for Ana Rose's carefully maintained composure. As the cavalry spurred their horses forward with war cries intended to terrorize their enemies, she stood up from her position and shouted with all the fury of a woman who had lost everything to corrupt men in uniform. "You lying murderers! You killed those families yourselves, and now you want to kill these innocent people to cover your crimes." Her words carried clearly across the canyon, audible to both the charging soldiers and the hidden warriors who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Morrison's expression shifted from confident aggression to startled confusion as he processed what she had just revealed. But by then, it was too late to alter the course of events he had set in motion. The first arrows came from the canyon, walls like deadly rain, silent and precise in their targeting. 3 soldiers toppled from their saddles before the sound of their own horses' hoofbeats had faded, their surprised cries cut short by shafts that found gaps in their hasty armor. The civilian trackers, with better instincts for survival, immediately wheeled their mounts and began retreating toward higher ground. But the soldiers pressed forward in disciplined formation despite the sudden appearance of resistance. Nahuel materialized from behind a boulder like an avenging spirit, his war paint gleaming in the morning sun and his rifle speaking with deadly authority. The shot took Lieutenant Morrison clean out of his saddle, spinning him around before he hit the ground hard enough to raise a cloud of dust. Ana Rose felt a fierce satisfaction at seeing the man who had planned her murder brought low, but there was no time to savor the moment. More warriors emerged from concealment on all sides, their timing coordinated with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. Some fought with rifles captured from previous encounters, others with traditional bows that allowed them to maintain deadly pressure without the telltale smoke that would reveal their positions. The canyon filled with the thunder of gunfire, the screams of wounded horses, and the war cries of men fighting for their lives. Sergeant Mills, proving his worth as a veteran soldier, managed to rally 6 men into a defensive circle and return disciplined fire toward the canyon walls. His booming voice cut through the chaos, directing his troops to concentrate their fire and conserve ammunition while looking for escape routes. Unlike his fallen lieutenant, Mills seemed to grasp immediately that they had ridden into a carefully prepared trap. "Fall back to the ridge," he shouted, using his own body to shield a wounded private while returning fire with mechanical precision. "This is an ambush. Send up the signal rockets and get word back to the fort." But even as he spoke, Ana Rose could see that escape would not be easy. The Comanche had chosen their battleground with masterful understanding of terrain and tactics, positioning themselves to control every exit from the canyon while maintaining cover that made them nearly impossible to target effectively. The soldiers found themselves caught in a killing ground with nowhere to run, and enemies who seemed to anticipate their every move. Jake Brennan, his loyalty to his employers apparently not extending to dying for them, managed to break free from the canyon and spur his horse toward the open prairie. Anna Rose watched him disappear over the ridge with mixed feelings, knowing that his escape meant word of the battle would reach Colonel Matthews, but also relieved that at least one person who had known James might survive to remember him fondly. As the battle raged around her, Anna Rose found herself in the surreal position of being safer than anyone else in the canyon, simply by virtue of standing in the open where all combatants could see she was not a threat. Bullets whined past her position, kicked up dust at her feet, and splintered the rocks behind her, but none were aimed in her direction. Both sides, for different reasons, wanted her alive. The turning point came when Nahuel and 3 of his warriors managed to work their way behind the soldiers' defensive position, using a narrow ravine that the cavalry had failed to secure in their haste to establish a perimeter. The attack from their unprotected rear broke the soldiers' formation and scattered them into individual fights for survival rather than coordinated military action. Sergeant Mills, wounded but still fighting with grim determination, found himself face to face with Nahuel in single combat that seemed to embody all the larger conflicts between their peoples. The 2 men were evenly matched, the soldiers' training and experience balanced against the war chief's speed and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Anna Rose watched in terrified fascination as they fought with rifle butts and knives, each seeking an advantage that would end the confrontation. "Surrender!" Nahuel called out in English, his voice carrying clearly despite his exertion. "Your men are defeated. Lay down your weapons, and you will be treated with honor." Mills paused in his attack, breathing heavily and bleeding from cuts on his arms and face. Around the canyon, the sounds of battle were indeed fading, as the surviving soldiers found themselves disarmed and surrounded by warriors who could have killed them easily, but had chosen restraint instead. The sergeant's tactical mind processed this information quickly, recognizing both the hopelessness of continued resistance and the unexpected mercy being offered. "What assurance do I have that my men will be treated fairly?" he demanded, his rifle still raised but no longer aimed directly at Nahuel. "We've all heard stories about Comanche prisoners." Nahuel lowered his own weapon slightly, his dark eyes serious and sincere. "You have my word as a war chief of the Namernu that no harm will come to men who surrender honorably, but continued fighting will force us to defend ourselves with lethal force." Anna Rose stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the canyon. "Sergeant Mills, you knew my husband James O'Malley. He spoke of you as an honorable soldier who cared about his men. These warriors have shown more honor in the last hour than Colonel Matthews has shown in years. Trust them." The sergeant's weathered face showed surprise at being recognized, followed by something that might have been shame as he processed the implications of Anna Rose's presence and her obvious alliance with the Comanche. "Mrs. O'Malley, I thought you were dead. The colonel said you had been killed by hostiles while fleeing Cedar Ridge." The colonel lied, just as he lied about everything else. Anna Rose replied firmly, "I'm alive, I'm here by choice, and I have evidence that will expose the truth about who really committed the massacre at Broken Creek." Mills looked around the canyon, taking in the sight of his surviving men surrounded by armed warriors who held them at gunpoint but had not harmed them unnecessarily. His military training warred with his growing understanding that nothing about this situation matched what he had been told to expect. "Stand down," he called out to his remaining soldiers, his voice carrying the absolute authority of command. "Lower your weapons and surrender. That's an order." With the battle concluded and the surviving soldiers secured as prisoners, Nahuel ordered his warriors to tend the wounded on both sides with equal care. Anna Rose watched in amazement as Comanche healers worked alongside their own people to treat injured cavalrymen, their medical knowledge proving far more sophisticated than the rough field medicine she had expected from frontier warfare. Lieutenant Morrison, it turned out, had survived his fall from horseback with nothing worse. then a broken collarbone and a severe concussion that left him dazed and compliant. As he sat propped against a boulder with his arm in a makeshift sling, Anna Rose approached him with James's letter clutched in her hand and justice burning in her heart. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal, "I want you to read something that your beloved Colonel Matthews would have killed me to keep secret." Morrison blinked up at her with unfocused eyes, his earlier arrogance replaced by the confusion of a man whose world had just been turned upside down. "Mrs. O'Malley, but you're supposed to be dead. The colonel said the hostiles had killed you during their raid on the settlement." "Another lie from your commanding officer," Anna Rose replied, unfolding the letter with careful reverence. "Just like his lie about who really massacred the families at Broken Creek. Read this, Lieutenant. Read what my husband discovered about your precious colonel and his theft of government supplies." As Morrison struggled to focus on the closely written pages, Sergeant Mills approached from where he had been overseeing the care of his wounded men. Despite his own injuries, he moved with the purposeful stride of a professional soldier who had accepted his new circumstances with pragmatic grace. "Mrs. O'Malley," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. Your husband was a good man and an honorable soldier. If he wrote that letter, then every word in it is true. I've had suspicions about some of the colonel's activities, but I never had proof." Anna Rose felt tears pricking her eyes at this. Unexpected vindication from someone who had known and respected James. "What kind of suspicions, Sergeant?" Mills glanced around to ensure they would not be overheard, then lowered his voice to a confidential tone. "Supply wagons that arrived empty when they should have been full. Patrol routes that took us away. From certain areas at convenient times. Civilian traders who seemed to know more about our operations than they should have. And too many good soldiers who asked inconvenient questions ending up dead from supposed accidents or enemy action." "Lieutenant." Morrison finished reading the letter and looked up at Anna Rose with an expression of dawning horror. The concussion might have clouded his thinking, but it had also stripped away the layers of rationalization and willful blindness that had allowed him to serve under Colonel Matthews without questioning his orders. "This can't be true," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. "The colonel is a decorated officer, a hero of the frontier wars. He wouldn't massacre innocent families for profit." "He would, and he did," Anna Rose said firmly. "And then he blamed the Comanche for his crimes, used the resulting outrage to justify raids against innocent bands, and profited from the chaos. While good men like my husband died trying to expose the truth." Nahwal approached their small group with the silent grace that had made him such an effective warrior. His war paint now streaked with sweat and dust, but his authority undiminished by the physical toll of battle. In his hands, he carried additional documents that Anna Rose had never seen before. "While your soldiers fought for their lives," he said to Morrison with grim satisfaction, "my warriors searched their saddlebags and found these orders from Colonel Matthews. Orders that confirm everything your late husband wrote in his letter. The documents made for damning reading. Detailed instructions for eliminating Anna Rose as a security threat, plans for blaming her death on hostile action, and most shocking of all, authorization to massacre any Comanche band that might have given her shelter in order to prevent them from corroborating her story." The casual way these genocidal orders were written, as if the systematic murder of innocent people was merely another administrative task, left even the hardened soldiers speechless. "My God," Sergeant Mills breathed, his face pale with shock and disgust. "We came here to commit mass murder based on lies. We were going to kill women and children to cover up theft and corruption." Morrison crumpled the orders in his good hand, his earlier confusion replaced by something approaching rage. "I've been a fool. We've all been fools, following orders without questioning, trusting leaders who saw us as nothing more than expendable tools." Anna Rose felt a fierce satisfaction at seeing the truth finally acknowledged by the men who had been sent to kill her, but she also recognized that revelation was only the beginning of justice, not its completion. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. How do we make sure Colonel Matthews and his conspirators face consequences for their crimes? Nahwal smiled with the expression of a man whose careful planning was finally bearing fruit. That, Anna Rose O'Malley, is where our Comanche sense of justice begins to serve your cause for the truth. We are going to send these soldiers back to Fort Davidson with a message that Colonel Matthews will find very difficult to ignore. As the sun reached its zenith above Devil's Canyon, casting sharp shadows that seemed to divide the world between light and darkness, Anna Rose realized that the morning's battle had been won not just with weapons but with truth. The next phase of their campaign would require even more courage, but for the first time since James's death, she felt genuinely hopeful that justice might actually be possible. 3 days after the battle at Devil's Canyon, Private Tommy Hendricks rode toward Fort Davidson with the weight of impossible truth heavy on his shoulders and a leather dispatch case that would either bring justice or spark a war that would consume half of Texas. The youngest soldier in Lieutenant Morrison's patrol, barely 19 and still carrying the optimism that frontier service hadn't yet beaten out of him, Tommy had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment of his military career. Beside him rode Sergeant Mills, his weathered face grim with the knowledge of what they were about to attempt. The veteran soldier had argued long and hard against Nahwal's plan, insisting that confronting Colonel Matthews directly would only get them both killed and accomplish nothing beyond warning their target to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. But Anna Rose had convinced him with words that still echoed in his memory, like the tolling of a funeral bell. "Sergeant, my husband tried to work within the system, tried to report through proper channels, tried to trust that good men would do the right thing when presented with evidence of corruption. They murdered him for his faith in military justice. Now we have a chance to bypass the corrupt officers and appeal directly to the honest soldiers who still believe in their oath to protect innocent lives." The plan they had devised was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Tommy would deliver Colonel Matthews' own written orders to the fort's garrison, along with James O'Malley's detailed letter and sworn statements from Lieutenant Morrison and the other surviving members of the patrol. The evidence would be presented not to Matthews himself, but to Captain Harrison Blackwood, the fort's second-in-command and a man whose reputation for integrity was legendary throughout the Territorial Army. What made the plan so dangerous was its reliance on Blackwood's character and the assumption that enough honest soldiers remained at Fort Davidson to prevent Matthews from simply murdering the messengers and destroying the evidence. If they were wrong, if corruption had spread deeper through the command structure than they realized, then Tommy and Mills would disappear into the fort's cells and never be seen again. "You don't have to do this, son," Mills said for the dozenth time as the fort's wooden palisade appeared on the horizon like a mirage shimmering in the afternoon heat. "There's still time to turn back, to find another way that doesn't put your neck in a noose." Tommy adjusted his grip on the dispatch case and tried to project more confidence than he actually felt. "Sergeant, my PA didn't raise me to run from doing what's right just because it's dangerous. Besides, somebody has to speak for Mrs. O'Malley's husband and all those families at Broken Creek who can't speak for themselves." The irony wasn't lost on either man that they were riding toward a confrontation with their own commanding officer on behalf of a woman who had found sanctuary with the very people they had been taught to consider savage enemies. The past 3 days in the Comanche camp had shattered every assumption Tommy had held about Indian warfare, Indian character, and the moral superiority of white civilization. He had watched Comanche healers tend wounded soldiers with the same Here they showed their own warriors, had seen children play games that were universal in their innocent joy, had observed elders sharing wisdom with the patient dignity that transcended all cultural boundaries. Most profoundly, he had witnessed the genuine love and respect that existed between Anna Rose and Nahuel, a bond that made a mockery of everything he had been told about the impossibility of understanding between their peoples. "Private," Mills said quietly as they approached the fort's main gate. "Once we ride through those gates, there's no going back. Are you prepared for the possibility that we might not ride out again?" Tommy thought about Anna Rose's tear-streaked face as she had thanked him for his courage, about Nahuel's solemn handshake and promise that the young soldier's sacrifice would be remembered by the Comanche people for generations, about his own dead father who had raised him to believe that some things were worth dying for. "Yes, Sergeant. I'm ready." Fort Davidson sprawled across the Texas prairie like a wooden cancer, its walls designed more to keep secrets in than to keep enemies out. As Tommy and Mills rode through the main gate, soldiers on guard duty greeted them with the casual familiarity of men who had served together through long months of boredom, punctuated by moments of terror. None of them suspected that the two dusty riders carried documents that would expose the corruption at the heart of their command structure. Colonel Matthews himself was nowhere to be seen, but Captain Blackwood emerged from the headquarters, building with the brisk efficiency that had made him respected throughout the territorial army. A tall man with prematurely grey hair and intelligent blue eyes, Blackwood carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned his rank through competence rather than politics or connections. "Sergeant Mills, Private Hendricks," he said, his voice carrying genuine concern as he noted their obvious exhaustion and the bandages that marked recent wounds. "We received word from the patrol that went looking for you. Jake Brennan reported that you were overwhelmed by hostiles at Devil's Canyon. We feared the worst." Mills and Tommy exchanged glances, both recognizing the careful way Brennan had reported the incident. The civilian tracker had clearly told enough truth to explain the patrol's failure to return, while concealing the more explosive details of what had actually transpired in that canyon. "Captain," Mills said formally, "we need to speak with you privately. What we have to report goes far beyond a simple Indian fight." Something in the sergeant's tone, some combination of urgency and barely contained anger, made Blackwood's expression sharpen with interest. "Very well. My office, gentlemen. And, Sergeant, bring whatever documents you're carrying in that dispatch case. I can see from your faces that this involves more than a routine patrol report." As they crossed the dusty parade ground toward the headquarters building, Tommy couldn't help but notice how many soldiers paused in their duties to watch their progress. Word had already spread through the fort's gossip network that survivors from Morrison's patrol had returned, and speculation about their experiences would be running rampant through the barracks and mess halls. Inside Blackwood's office, with the door securely closed and guards posted to ensure privacy, Mills opened the dispatch case with hands that trembled slightly despite his veteran composure. The weight of what they were about to reveal, the magnitude of the accusations they were making against their own commanding officer, made even routine actions feel momentous. "Captain," Mills began carefully, "before I show you these documents, I need your word that you'll hear us out completely before making any decisions about how to proceed. What we've discovered will shock you, but it's all documented and verified." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes serious and attentive. "You have my word, Sergeant. I've known you for 3 years, and I've never known you to exaggerate or fabricate. If you say something is documented and verified, then I'll examine the evidence with an open mind." The first document that Mills placed on the desk was James O'Malley's letter, its pages now worn from multiple readings, but its damning content still clearly legible. Blackwood read in silence, his expression growing increasingly grave as he absorbed the detailed accusations of theft, murder, and false flag operations designed to justify military action against innocent Comanche bands. "This is signed by Sergeant O'Malley," Blackwood observed, his voice carefully neutral. "But O'Malley is dead, supposedly by his own hand according to the official report. How did you come to possess his personal correspondence?" Tommy stepped forward, his young voice steady despite his nervousness. "Captain, we got it from his widow. Mrs. Anna Rose O'Malley is alive, contrary to what Colonel Matthews reported. She's been carrying this letter since her husband's death, trying to find someone with the authority and integrity to act on its contents." The captain's eyebrows rose sharply. "Mrs. O'Malley is alive. The colonel reported that she had been killed during a Comanche raid on a supply train 3 weeks ago." "Another lie, sir," Mills said grimly, placing the second set of documents on the desk. "These are Lieutenant Morrison's written orders from Colonel Matthews, orders that commanded us to find and eliminate Mrs. O'Malley as a security threat, then blame her death on hostile action." Blackwood read the orders twice, his face growing paler with each sentence. When he finally looked up, his blue eyes held a mixture of horror and righteous anger that gave both soldiers hope that their dangerous gamble might actually succeed. "These orders constitute a direct violation of military law, civil law, and basic human decency," he said quietly. "If they're authentic, then Colonel Matthews is guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of military authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer." "There's more, Captain," Tommy said, producing the final batch of documents. "Sworn statements from Lieutenant Morrison and the other surviving members of our patrol, all testifying to the truth of Sergeant O'Malley's accusations and confirming the details of the Colonel's criminal activities." As Captain Blackwood finished reading the last of the documents, the office door burst open without ceremony to admit Colonel Matthews himself, his face flushed with anger and his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. Behind him came 2 sergeants from his personal staff, both men known for their unquestioning loyalty to their commanding officer and their willingness to handle sensitive situations with violence when necessary. "Captain Blackwood," Matthews said in a voice that carried the dangerous calm of barely controlled rage, "I understand that some of my returning soldiers have been spreading malicious rumors about military operations. I've come to collect them and their fabricated documents for proper disciplinary action." The colonel's pale eyes fixed on Tommy and Mills with the predatory intensity of a hawk studying field mice. "Sergeant Mills, Private Hendricks, you're both under arrest for desertion, collaboration with hostile forces, and spreading seditious materials designed to undermine military discipline." Blackwood rose slowly from behind his desk, his tall frame seeming to fill the office as he faced his superior officer with steady resolve. "Colonel, these men are under my protection as material witnesses in a case involving serious criminal allegations. They will not be removed from this office until I've had time to fully investigate their claims." Matthews's hand moved closer to his weapon, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Captain, you seem to forget who holds ultimate authority at this fort. These men are my subordinates, and I will deal with them as I see fit." "And you seem to forget, Colonel, that military law supersedes personal authority when crimes against civilians are involved," Blackwood replied calmly, his own hand now resting on his pistol grip. "These documents constitute evidence of capital crimes, and I have a duty to ensure they reach the proper authorities for investigation." The tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife as the 2 officers faced each other in a confrontation that had been building for months of unspoken suspicions and growing moral divide. Tommy felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he realized that his life and Mills's lives now depended on Captain Blackwood's courage and the hope that enough honest soldiers remained in the fort to support him. "Very well," Matthews said. Finally, his voice carrying the deadly promise of a rattlesnake's warning. "If you insist on protecting these traitors and their lies, then you leave me no choice but to declare you unfit for command and place you under arrest as well." But before the colonel could draw his weapon, the office door opened again to admit Major William Cartwright, the fort's senior medical officer, and a man whose moral authority rivaled even Blackwood's reputation for integrity. Behind him came a group of junior officers whose faces showed they had been listening at the door and had heard enough to understand the stakes of the confrontation. "Colonel Matthews," Cartwright said, with the calm authority of a man who had seen too much death to be intimidated by threats of violence, "I believe you should know that copies of these documents have already been dispatched to territorial headquarters, along with sworn affidavits from multiple witnesses. Your window for containing this scandal has already closed." The lie was beautifully delivered and completely convincing, causing Matthews to hesitate just long enough for the other officers to position themselves between him and the door. Tommy realized that word of their mission had spread through the fort's officer corps, and that Captain Blackwood had more allies than any of them had dared to hope. "You're all making a terrible mistake," Matthews said, but his voice now carried the desperate edge of a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. "These allegations are fabrications created by hostile forces to divide our command and weaken our effectiveness against Indian raids." Lieutenant Peter Garrison, barely older than Tommy himself, but carrying the moral certainty of youth, stepped forward with documents of his own. "Colonel, I've been keeping detailed records of supply discrepancies and unauthorized civilian contacts for the past 6 months. Everything in Sergeant O'Malley's letter correlates with irregularities I've personally observed." The arrest of Colonel Matthews proceeded with the formal precision of military protocol, but Tommy could see the profound relief in the faces of honest soldiers who had finally found the courage to act against corruption they had long suspected but never dared to challenge. As the disgraced colonel was led away under guard, his threats and protests echoing across the parade ground, Fort Davidson seemed to exhale collectively like a man who had been holding his breath for months. Captain Blackwood, now the fort's acting commander, immediately dispatched riders to territorial headquarters with complete copies of all evidence, along with requests for a formal investigation and court-martial proceedings. More importantly for Anna Rose's immediate safety, he ordered the recall of all patrols hunting for the hostile Comanche band that had supposedly killed her, officially ending the military pursuit that had driven her into exile. "Sergeant Mills, Private Hendricks," he said as the 3 men stood alone in his office after the dramatic confrontation, "what you've accomplished here today goes far beyond simple military justice. You've exposed a cancer that was eating away at the moral foundation of this command, and you've prevented God knows how many innocent deaths from Matthew's future schemes." Tommy felt a warm glow of pride at the captain's words, but he also knew that their mission was far from complete. "Captain, what about Mrs. O'Malley? She's still technically a fugitive, according to official records, and there are probably other officers involved in the colonel's conspiracy who might try to silence her." Blackwood nodded grimly. "Already considered, Private. I'm personally leading a patrol to the Comanche camp where she's taken shelter, not to arrest her but to escort her safely back to civilization and ensure she receives full protection as a key witness in the upcoming trials." The captain paused, studying both soldiers with thoughtful blue eyes. "However, I should warn you that testifying in court-martial proceedings will likely end your military careers. Officers don't forget soldiers who expose corruption in their ranks, even when those soldiers are acting from the highest moral principles." Mills straightened his shoulders with the dignity of a man who had found his true calling. "Captain, After what I've seen these past few days, after witnessing the honor and decency that Mrs. O'Malley found among people we've been taught to consider enemies, I'm not sure I want to continue serving in an army that would punish soldiers. For telling the truth, Tommy nodded his agreement, thinking of Anna Rose's quiet courage, of Nahuel's unexpected wisdom, of the Comanche children who had played with the same innocent joy as any white children he had ever known. I joined the army to protect innocent people, sir. If the army won't let me do that, then maybe it's time to find other ways to serve justice. As the sun set over Fort Davidson, painting the wooden walls in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to promise new beginnings, Tommy and Mills prepared for one final ride back to Devil's Canyon. This time they would carry news of victory instead of desperate pleas for help, and they would escort Anna Rose O'Malley back to a world that had finally acknowledged the truth she had risked everything to reveal. But more than that, they would carry with them the knowledge that honor and courage could still triumph over corruption and greed, that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied, and that sometimes the most unlikely alliances could accomplish what traditional authorities had failed to achieve. The boy who had ridden out to arrest a fugitive widow was returning as a man who understood that true heroism often meant choosing principle over safety, truth over convenience, and moral courage over blind obedience. 6 months after Colonel Matthews was sentenced to hang for treason and murder, Anna Rose O'Malley stood on a hill overlooking the most beautiful valley she had ever seen, watching Nahuel direct the construction of their new home with the same quiet competence he had once applied to warfare. The house rising from the prairie earth was unlike anything either of their cultures had built before, a harmony of Comanche wisdom and frontier practicality that seemed to embody their own unlikely union. The walls were built from local stone that would stand against any storm, but the interior spaces followed the circular flow of lodge design that promoted harmony and connection. Windows faced east to greet each dawn with gratitude, while the hearth occupied the center of the main room where families had always gathered around fires for warmth, food, and stories. Most importantly, there were rooms designed specifically for the children they hoped to have, spaces that would nurture young lives in safety and love. The court proceedings are finally over, Anna Rose said, settling beside Nahuel on the buffalo robe they had spread on the hillside for their afternoon rest. Tommy Hendricks stopped by yesterday with news from San Antonio. The last of Matthew's conspirators has been sentenced, and the territorial governor has officially pardoned all Comanche bands for crimes they didn't commit. Nahuel nodded with satisfaction, though his dark eyes held the weariness of a man who had seen too much injustice to celebrate any single victory too enthusiastically. Justice served is justice earned, but it cannot restore the lives that were lost to greed and hatred. We can only ensure that their sacrifice was not meaningless. Anna Rose reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers with the easy intimacy of two people who had chosen to build a life together, despite every obstacle the world had placed in their path. James would be proud of what we accomplished. The supply theft ring is broken, the innocent families at Broken Creek have been vindicated, and maybe most importantly, people are starting to understand that peace between our peoples is possible. Their marriage 3 months ago had been performed according to both Comanche tradition and territorial law, witnessed by Captain Blackwood representing the military authorities and Ayana representing the spiritual traditions of the people. The ceremony itself had been simple but profound, two damaged souls finding wholeness in their commitment to building something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. Anna Rose, Nahuel said quietly, using the tone he reserved. For conversations of particular importance, I have been thinking about the school. She turned to study his profile, noting the way his jaw tightened when he was working through complex problems. They had often discussed the possibility of establishing a school that would serve both Comanche children and the sons and daughters of white settlers, teaching languages and customs that would promote understanding rather than fear. The tribal council approved our proposal, he continued, a smile beginning to play around the corners of his mouth. They agree that education is the path to a future where our children won't have to choose between their heritage and their survival. Anna Rose felt tears of joy spring to her eyes as she realized that their most ambitious dream was finally becoming reality. When can we begin construction? How many students do you think we might have in the first year? Ayana believes we could have 30 children by autumn, split evenly between Comanche and white families, Noel replied, his excitement growing as he spoke. Captain Blackwood has promised military protection for the school, and several ranchers have volunteered to provide building materials and labor. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their planning session, and they looked up to see Tommy Hendricks riding toward them with the easy confidence of a young man who had found his calling in life. No longer the uncertain private who had risked everything to deliver evidence of corruption, Tommy had become a successful rancher and a bridge between communities that had once viewed each other with suspicion and hatred. Mrs. Nahuel, he called out, using the name Anna Rose had taken after their marriage, I've got news that I think you'll want to hear immediately. Anna Rose and Nahuel rose together, noting the excitement in Tommy's voice and the broad smile that lit up his weathered features. In the months since Matthew's arrest, Tommy had become a regular visitor to their valley, drawn by the sense of purpose and community that seemed to flourish wherever Anna Rose and Nahuel worked together. The territorial legislature just voted to establish the James O'Malley Memorial Fund, Tommy announced, dismounting and approaching them with obvious pleasure. It's designed to provide educational opportunities for children from all communities, with particular emphasis on promoting understanding between different cultures. Anna Rose felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude at this unexpected honor for her late husband's memory. James had died trying to protect innocent lives and expose corruption, but now his name would be associated with building bridges rather than documenting betrayals. There's more, Tommy continued, his grin growing even wider. The fund's first major project is going to be a substantial grant to support your school. Apparently, the story of how you two brought justice to the frontier has inspired people all across the territory. As the three friends talked and planned and dreamed together on that hillside overlooking their valley, Anna Rose reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a desperate widow fleeing through the darkness with nothing but grief and a dangerous truth. Now she was a beloved wife, a respected teacher, and a living symbol of the possibility for peace between peoples who had been taught to see each other as enemies. I have somewhere to go, she whispered, echoing the words that had brought her to Nahuel's protection all those months ago. I have a home, a family, a purpose, and a future filled with hope. Nahuel pulled her close, his strong arms wrapping around her as the sun set over their valley with the promise of another beautiful tomorrow. And you will always be under my protection, my beloved Anna Rose, just as I will always be under yours. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimneys of neighbors, both Comanche and white. Children played games that transcended cultural boundaries, and the future stretched ahead, like an unwritten story waiting to be filled with love, understanding, and the kind of justice that heals rather than simply punishes. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.